with Trump's picks. Here's Chris.
Hello, Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. I know some of you hit pause after the election on the media for good reason, bad reason, doesn't matter. Let me catch you up. They're still playing the game of petty party advantage. The spin cycle is running on the buzz about Trump's latest picks, and we have some insight on that. But my take is, unless there is a major vetting issue that affects not just your feelings about the kind of person a pick is, because that's up to the president, but to the ability to do the job or to the security of this country. Unless we see that, let's just wait and see what they do. Because I believe a lot of this drama is just for drama's sake. The FEMA director got heat today, and her answers are worthy of a look and a check, and we will do that. Jon Stewart tells Democrats to fight like the GOP, abandon playing by the rules, which as a headline seems stupid. And I actually think it's a little inaccurate, but it's stupid because the last thing we need is more people trying to go around doing the right thing, right? But that wasn't really Stewart's point. And look, I get his cynicism. I just refuse to echo it because I believe things can get better. And if you don't believe they can get better, then they're never going to get better. And you don't need to be the bigger cheat to make things better, right? So Stewart made a point that I made last night. He just made it better. And the point is that too many are too often caught up in what they see as norms and normalizing what is not normal. It's the most common complaint that I get. But often those judgments are stilted or short-sighted and crafted to suit merely what benefits their position. So, for example, you don't hear Biden or Harris say illegal entrants are committing crimes in this country and we have to stop it. Or that, look, we all get trans kids need protection, but so do female athletes. Now, that would all be normal, right? Unless the norm is to ignore the border and pretend people are crazy to question anything about culture changes. So it is normalizing to not blow up every lie that Trump tells, despite criticizing him more than any politician I've ever covered, often with cause. But it is not normalizing to ignore that Biden wasn't up to running for office. It wasn't normalizing that you lied about how sharp he was and that the media just went along with it. None of that is normalizing. So it is normalizing Israel's genocide to say that Israel is defending itself against multiple enemies and to get its and our people back. That's normalizing. But it is not normalizing to just ignore, if not amplify, people all over this damn country saying things like this.
When Netanyahu says that he doesn't believe in a Palestinian state, I don't take that to mean that he wants to kill all the Palestinians. Just like when Hamas in their charter says that they don't believe in a Jewish state, I don't take that to mean that they want to kill all the Jews.
You don't take it to mean that. You don't take it to mean that. So that's okay, right? Now, I reject that standard, that it's okay, just gloss over that, because he's just saying what he thinks. Norms should not be mere preferences. Norms should be principles that display core values. So instead of ignoring that, because, social media and some campuses will boil if you go after the kid, I say show this everywhere.
When October 7 happened, and that's a fact, they told me it in the inside. They told me that they planned to move on and kill as much as they could. In Beersheba, in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, they wanted to slaughter everybody. Do you know how many bodies were there? Do you know how much violence was taken on me? I was caught in the middle of a lynch. All I saw is 100% of civilians lynching me, beating me up. I was with a broken leg. I had bruises all over my body.
I don't know who that kid is. I don't know who his parents are. But he should be looking her in the eye and listening to her instead of nonchalantly just musing that, I don't think Hamas wants to kill Jews. I think it's really just getting rid of the oppressor. That's something not to normalize. Because normalizing what was done on October 7th, saying the numbers are all wrong and that Hamas isn't really out to kill anybody, they just want to help themselves, and that Israel's behind a lot of it, and that the hostages are really treated okay. It's bullshit, okay? And if you care about Trump's mouth, care about his mouth too. And too many are too loud about the wrong things, and they're too quiet about what actually does matter. And now is the time to change, because we're in a reset. And yet, we see the same going on. And it's not just that issue. It's a lot of issues. For instance, the reaction to the election in Texas, which seems to suggest that Trump winning means we're now a Christian nation. So they play with ideas like your body, my choice, banning trans women from bathrooms, wanting to mandate teaching Bible stories in public schools. Could you see Jesus wanting to do any of those things, by the way? Don't get me wrong. I'm raised Catholic. I choose to have faith. That's my business, not yours. And I believe the Bible has a lot of good lessons. And Lord knows I could do better to live according to them than I do. And I have no problem teaching those lessons. I think they could and probably should. And then compare them with other faiths and ethical constructs to show the sameness that we see in so many monotheistic structures. And the officials there know this. And by the way, doing it my way or the way, called comparative religious exercise, would only enhance the teaching. And a lot of schools do it. You know that. But no, they want it to be about Christian supremacy. Right? The law on the subject is clear. The Supreme Court has a specific test for the First Amendment Establishment Clause. This clearly violates it. Okay? Like with moves to mandate prayer, mandate the commandments, and all these other things that founders rejected in our Constitution. They left out references to God as operative, despite it appearing that all 39 signers were Christian, right? Why? My father, may he rest in peace, said it best in a speech almost exactly 40 years ago.
We know that the price of seeking to force our belief on others is that they might someday force their belief on us. Now, this freedom is the fundamental strength of our unique experiment in government.
He was right then, and it's right now. And we all know it. So don't tell me about what you want to normalize. Normal seems to be just what you like in the moment. And this is where we're stuck. It's not about norms. Because what is normal is accommodation and consistency in a secular democracy. That's normal for us. This is about advantage over a manufactured other side. The fact that we would rather go crazy about Dr. Oz, how'd you pick him? Or a report about Matt Gaetz that I will bet you is going to have everything in it that you've already heard. And yet be relatively quiet about exposing the actual normalizing of what is truly abnormal. Like America allowing anti-Semitism, pro-Hamas BS, like ignoring the Constitution because Trump is some kind of Christian king. If so much of this seems like, gee, this is absurd, isn't it? It's because it is. That's the game. We have distracted ourselves from what matters for too long, and for the two parties in a battle to the bottom of which is worse. I say enough. It is time to ignore what doesn't matter and focus on fixing the problems that we all agree exist. That should be the new normal. What do you think? Let me know. All right, now, let's take on some of these normalizings, meaning things that we're ignoring because they matter so much. Like what? President-elect Trump picking Elon Musk, giving him huge portfolio to look at everything in government to see how we can do more with less. Trump attended a test launch of Musk's SpaceX rocket today. I don't really care, but it does show that they're together and it matters. What about the idea of taking someone like Musk and using him as a disruptor and as somebody to help improve efficiency? And I want to talk about what we learned from the FEMA director. I actually want to talk about that first. Remember what happened in North Carolina. The people there are still suffering. Why? FEMA was surprised by it. did she give the right kinds of answers in terms of transparency, or does her attitude in those answers show that there may have been a bias at play? Independent journalist, Substack author, podcaster, Matt Taibbi worked closely with Musk as one of the authors of the Twitter files. Matt, good to see you. Glad to see you survived the election. All right. So you got me? Can you hear me? You got your sound on and all that?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
What are you, a novice? You got those expensive cans on your head and you don't even know what you're doing. All right, so
I'm sorry about that. My apologies.
Let's start with the FEMA director. So here's the allegation. You didn't do what you were supposed to do because this is Trump land and you didn't want to. She says no. Here's her being asked by Democrat Goldman about this.
Any type of misinformation that creates some type of mistrust in the federal government creates a lack of opportunity for individuals that have been impacted by these disasters to get the assistance that they need and that they're eligible for.
And do you think that there were some people who did not receive disaster assistance because of this misinformation by Donald Trump?
We will never know if there are people that should have applied and didn't, but there is the possibility that individuals may not have applied for assistance because of what they were reading across social media.
Now, again, I think it's a blame game, but it did seem in this hearing, to the extent that it was about what matters, that they did what they ordinarily do. Were they caught by surprise? Yes. Did they not plan? Obviously, yes. Are they struggling in the aftermath? Yes, but it wasn't political. In terms of transparency, how does this work for you?
I mean, look, I think I don't know the particulars of the FEMA discussion all that well. I think they made a big deal about misinformation when actually it was pretty typical politics, complaining about an insufficient response and a low promise of early funds. And what they really wanted to do was have some kind of control over the flow of information about the storm. So, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I agree with you. I think this is mostly just typical politics.
Elon Musk, you know him. What do you think about choosing him to look at efficiencies in government?
Well, look, one thing I will say about Elon, and I've had some not entirely positive experiences with him, but he came into Twitter promising to run the company with a fraction of the staff, and he did it. It wasn't long after he arrived that most of the staff was gone, and the company is still going. Now, is it going better than it was before? I don't know. That's a different question. But look, the mandate was to dismantle the deep state and to take a look at some of these agencies that have gigantic budgets and almost no oversight, particularly the intelligence agencies and the military. And if they're actually going to take a bite out of it, it would be this kind of person who would have to do it.
So explain why it's this kind of person. What sophistication do you know him to have that he could look at something like an intelligence agency and decide what is fat versus, what is meat and bone?
None. I wouldn't expect him to have any sophistication. I mean, I'm sure he's quite familiar with intelligence services and has had plenty of contact with people who work there. I know for a fact that there are a lot of people in Twitter who worked in the intelligence services, but that's not the issue. The issue is that only an outsider is going to come into this world and make deep cuts into personnel and, mission scope and that sort of thing. And that was what they ran on. They ran on that, those kinds of cuts. And it would have to be this kind of person who is just determined to come in willy-nilly and just take big swipes of an axe at these bureaucracies. And that's who he is. So for better or worse, that's who he is.
You are a very classic, clear-eyed thinker in my experience. What is your take on this idea of normalizing? Where are we in terms of what the right perspective is to have on people saying, oh, you're not supposed to pick a guy like Elon? And shame on you, Cuomo, for not just pounding Trump about every lie he tells all the time. And there's no other coverage that's warranted of that. Normalizing. What do you think that effect was on us in this election and what we should see it as now?
So there are a lot of terms like this that get bandied around in the media. Another one that we've seen a lot lately is sane washing. It's this idea, and it hits the ear in a very snobbish way when ordinary people hear media people talking about, oh, you're normalizing this figure or that figure. That is very offensive to somebody who voted for a politician specifically so that they could nominate whoever they wanted to run these positions. That's how democracy works. And to have sort of entrenched Washington media talking about, oh, you can't normalize this person or that person, it reinforces to me the idea that these people don't understand that the people are ultimately in control in this country. Whether you like their choices or not, this is how it's designed to be. And they shouldn't complain that way, I don't think.
What is your best sense of optimism in this administration and your biggest concern?
Well, my best sense of optimism is on the speech issue, which I've been working on for, 2 or 3 years now, beginning with the Twitter file stuff. And, a lot of the issues that we looked at were incredibly complicated and it would have taken somebody with a high level of expertise to really even understand these issues. But we've already seen the nomination of somebody like Brendan Carr to the FCC. It's pretty clear he knows most of those issues pretty well and is going after exactly the things that we reported on, which is satisfying to me personally. The thing that I worry about is exactly what you talked about before, which is this idea that sometimes parties end up in a race to the bottom. They will use the same tactics that were used against them to pursue their own political enemies. And there's going to be enormous temptation within the Trump government to do things like go after media organizations they don't like. And they can't do that. If they end up doing that, it will be a disaster because then we'll have both parties using these sort of unconstitutional means to go after each other.
What would be the best change that Carr could bring to the FCC?
Well, going after things like federal funding of fact-checking organizations that downgrade companies based on political leanings or whether or not their narratives are pro-government or not. I think that's a serious issue. But mostly just keeping the intelligence services and the enforcement agencies out of the content moderation business. I think that would be a huge step, and he seems to want to do that.
Do you think that there will be anything done on what we do about content moderation? Do you believe that that is an issue for federal regulation, as we heard from Zuckerberg? Or do you think you let the market decide and have different platforms make different rules, and we'll see who likes what best?
Well, the American system is pretty explicit in saying that the government has no role in that particular arena. There are laws that I think we need to adjust, probably. Like, for instance, like libel laws. The way they used to work back in the days before the internet with newspapers, I think was pretty functional. But they clearly have broken down in the internet age when there's so much content you can't possibly have that many lawsuits. So there needs to be new processes to deal with those sorts of offenses, but we can't have, a government enforcement squad going after misinformation and disinformation, because that will lead to, I think, political temptation to abuse those authorities. Yeah,
I want to get Mr. Carr on the show, and I want to talk to him about what I believe is the key. The difference between Section 230, giving them immunity makes sense on one level because they can't control the content. As you say, it's flooding in from all over. I'll come after Taibbi for what happens on his Substack or his podcast. But, for them, there's just too much. Notice is the issue. When you are told that this is out there and you do nothing, now you have a problem. Matt Taibbi, to be continued. Great to have you. Thank you very much. And if I don't speak to you, have a great Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for you.
You too. Thanks, Chris. I
appreciate
it.
You will, Matt. 4 minutes and 5 seconds. Coming up, more big announcements from President-elect Trump. Dr. Oz. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Howard Lutnick, you saw him on this show. Commerce Secretary. And the WWE's Linda McMahon, Education Secretary. Is that kind of a beat job if they get rid of her department? One of the biggest jobs still on the table, the one that may matter the most, Treasury Secretary. Who dat? Next.
Of RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services will help our nation address the illness industrial complex that holds our health hostage. Over the past decade, thousands of federally funded health researchers have reported financial conflicts of interest. We need better researched lifestyle advice from unbiased scientists, and RFK Jr. could help.
Oz started off there like it was a hostage video, but then he picked it up. That was the TV doctor that we all know, one-time senatorial candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz. He endorsed RFK Jr. for HHS secretary. Today, Trump announced Oz will be the man in charge of Medicare and Medicaid services under RFK Jr. at the Department of HHS. That's right. Bobby's going to be in charge of the entitlements also. We are seeing more from Trump on the economic side. His team is taking shape. Howard Lutnick, who you saw here, Commerce Secretary. Here's what he told me about the staffing that we're now seeing come to fruition.
When it's your company, right? He's the boss. He gets elected. The concept of these people working against him needs to end. Everybody's got to be going where his policies go.
Now, it's interesting. One, that's not normal because you're supposed to have some kind of a mix. But everything that we've lived through hasn't been normal, right? Someone being chased and prosecuted and persecuted, Trump's voters would say, is not normal either. So when Lutnick said that, people are like, that's exactly what's happening now. So let's bring in Stephen Moore, senior advisor to the Trump campaign, literally wrote the book on Trumponomics, and Chris Hahn, NewsNation political contributor and the host of the Aggressive Progressive podcast. Chris, I start with you. Are the progressives being too aggressive in chasing after the appointments or the selections of the president-elect?
You can't chase after every of them, right? I mean, I think when you get elected president, you have a certain amount of picks that you are entitled to. In fact, all of them, unless there's some sort of reason not to put them. And then some of these guys, there are clear reasons. I think Matt Gaetz, there's clear reasons not to put him in, not just his personal life, but his qualifications. I think Pete Hegseth, there's clear reasons. But to chase every single one of them would be a big mistake. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And look, Trump gets the cabinet he wants, but he better be very, very careful. He is immediately a lame duck. And the more time he wastes defending things these people do, the harder it's going to be for him to get his agenda through the closer we get to the midterm elections. The clock starts ticking already for him. So let's say Dr. Oz does a horrible job with Medicare and Medicaid. You annoyed a key constituent, elder people. And now the senators and the House members who are up for re-election might start to question your judgment and try to pull away from you. So it's very, very difficult, especially given the fact that the House is going to have a 1 or 2 seat majority.
Quick point. Do you or I know who is in charge of Medicare and Medicaid right now? No, Chris, we don't know. So the idea that people are going to be looking real close at Oz is, a little overblown. But, Stephen, let me ask you something. You've never...
Yeah, but he is a TV personality, Chris. He's a TV personality. He's going to want to be on TV.
Hey, listen, I get it. People want to be on TV. He's a TV guy. But all I'm saying is, if we know one thing, it's that just because somebody has a pedigree doesn't mean that they're going to go in there and change things for the better. So let's just see what happens. That's my point. Stephen, you have never staffed anything in your life with a sole criterion that everyone on that staff believes what you believe and agrees with you. Is Trump overstating the need to have a bunch of loyalists?
Well, look, Chris, first of all, I agree that the president should have the aides and the cabinet officers that he wants, unless they're clearly unfit for office or they have some kind of criminal record or something like that that would disqualify them. So far, I would say I'm pretty impressed with some of the people, especially, look, I'm focused on the economic issues. I really like Doug Burgum. I think he'll be a great Interior Secretary. He was the governor of North Dakota. I like Chris Wright. He's one of the energy experts in this country to head up the energy department. I can't speak of some of these other areas because I just don't have the expertise in it. But ultimately, Chris, I think what Trump is trying to do, which is what every president tries to do, is pick people who will pursue his agenda. Now, you may not like Trump's agenda, but it was pretty clear to the American people what he wanted to do. He wants to cut taxes. He wants to deregulate. He wants to drain the swamp. He wants to, and I think these people that he's selected are people that will follow his orders and get that done.
Right, but they all follow the orders and get that done. He picked people, my understanding, Steve, tell me if I'm wrong, is look at your agency. On some of the agencies, I want you to cut fat. The agencies around the intelligence and especially the DOJ, the reason he's picking Gates, watch them and make sure they don't come after me again. That's why he's picking them.
Well, look, he's obviously a little defensive given the fact that the Democrats have tried to impeach him 2 or 3 times, et cetera. But let me bring up RFK Jr., because I think that's a really interesting choice for HHS. And, I think there's some good features to that and some features. And I know RFK Jr. a bit and I admire him. I disagree with him profoundly on some issues. But, one of the cool things about him, Chris, is I think he will take on this what I call this healthcare industrial complex that has built up in Washington that wastes tons of money, that gives huge amounts of money to the hospitals, the insurance companies, and so on. And I thought that was a pretty courageous pick.
It's worth a try, right? Let me ask you something, Chris. What's the reaction if Trump tries this semi-fugazi move of calling a recess if it seems like the Senate isn't going to do his bidding, and he's a little worried now because his guy, Senator Scott, didn't get the leadership vote that he thought. So the first test of do as I say didn't go the way he wanted. What if he does that?
Well, look, he's going to have to get the Senate to go along with it, right? And the founders didn't want that. The founders wanted ambition to counteract ambition. And if the senators want to yield their power to Donald Trump so they can have recess appointments, I don't know why they would become senators. It's one of their key powers, right? They have the right to advise and consent the president on his nominees. So if he really feels these picks are so unpalatable to the Senate, why would he even pick them? And why would a senator then agree to have a recess so that he could just have unlimited power to appoint whoever he wants? That's not what the founders intended. It's not what the recess appointment was for. People were getting to Washington by horse and buggies. The Senate was only in session for 6 months a year. This is ridiculous. It's going to be a court case if it does happen.
Well, it may be a court case. Okay, it may be a court case. But your initial thing is that's not what they intended. Who cares? If the rule is there and it can be exercised to your ambition, you do it. Welcome to politics. But, Stephen, do you think that would be a bad look for the president-elect?
I wouldn't favor that. I think there is an advise and consent power of the Senate. And I'm very respectful, Chris, of the fact that, the more I get involved in politics over my last 40 years, the more I just marvel at the ingeniousness of our founding fathers, that they set up this system of checks and balances. And look, I love Donald Trump. I've been with him for, 8 or 9 years now. But every president needs restraints from other branches of government.
Stephen Moore, it's good to have you on again. Chris Hahn, always a pleasure. Thank you both. Appreciate you. 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Up next, Biden's decision to let Ukraine use our long-range missiles against Russia. We talked about it. We're going to talk about it again because now Russia is saying, do it again, and we will have a nuclear response. Is that real? Is that what we get? Should we back off? What you need to know next. 1,000 days. That's how long it's been since Russia invaded Ukraine. And now, are things at a breaking point? Last night, after getting the go-ahead from President Biden, and by the way, yes, the buck stops with him. Truman was right. But it's not just him who makes the determination, right? You have a whole military group of advisors. So they give Ukraine the go-ahead to use long-range missiles, and they do it, hitting a region in Russia, which they say was one of its weapons depots, okay, not a populated area. Is that true? I don't know. Today, Putin responded by officially lowering the threshold for when Russia will engage in a nuclear attack. Was there ever one, or is it whenever he wants? So how real is this? Let's ask Tennessee Republican member of Congress Tim Burchett, staunchly against more U.S. aid going to Ukraine and former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor. Now, what I would like to do is leave it to you. Tim, tell the audience and Bill why you believe this was a mistake for Biden, and I'll let him respond directly.
I know what he's going to say. If he's for this, he's going to say that it allowed, them to hit areas that they could launch into Ukraine, and I get that. But we've escalated this war, and Putin has his back against the wall on this thing. More than anything, his pride. The Ukrainians are doing much better than American military intelligence thought they would, but he is threatening nuclear war. And I dare say I don't know that I think I would take that very serious. I really would, because I do not want to risk that. If we have a nuclear conflict, everybody knows it's one of those things. It's not like when North Korea does it and they can't get it off the launch pad and it kills 200 people underground and over 200 on top of the ground. This thing could escalate quickly. And if something happens to Putin and his number two comes in, could be worse. I just think we need to de-escalate this as fast as possible. I think Trump has a different plan. I think the world understands that. I think those people who have invested heavily in Americans' missile defense system, primarily a group of congressmen on both sides of the aisle, need to quit voicing their opinions on this thing.
Bill.
Of course, the senator's right. We have to take it seriously.
Not a senator yet. Still a member of Congress in Tennessee. Don't blow up his head.
Don't be cussing me now. What are you doing? I'm not 150 years old.
Sorry to go down on you there, Congressman. But you're right, of course. We have to take this seriously. You're absolutely right. Putin does have nuclear weapons. There's no doubt about that. And he has said many times in the 1,000 days that Chris just mentioned that the Russians have been invading Ukraine, he has said many times that he is threatening to use these. Every time that we've decided or we were thinking about providing the next weapon, whether it's the tank or the F-16 or the HIMARS or indeed the ATACMS that we're now talking about now, or even whether we're going to allow the Ukrainians to shoot into Russia 2 months ago, which we decided every time we had a decision, Mr. Putin says, I've got nuclear weapons. And you're absolutely right. We have to take it seriously. But he has said that every time. And every time he has not. Now, you mentioned how the North Koreans have problems with their weapons. The Russians have problems with their weapons. The Russians have tested a weapon that has exploded in the silo 3 times. It may not even work. And the Chinese have told him, Congressman, as you know, the Chinese have said, President Xi has said to President Putin, shut up. Don't even talk about using nuclear weapons. I think there is a very, very low chance that he will do this. And I think if we don't stop the Russians, if the Ukrainians don't stop the Russians with our support in Ukraine, we are threatened.
So let me reframe it this way. One fact that I think is helpful for the audience. These are long-range missiles, but they are not as long as the range that Russia's already been using in this conflict, which is part of the reason they asked for them. Congressman Burchett, as you know, is that they were getting hit by missiles that were held at a distance that they couldn't reach. So that was the rationale. But the bigger question for you is, are you concerned that if you mollify Putin, you get more of this elsewhere?
Yes, I am. And I think everybody knows Trump is one of his biggest goals is to end this conflict, and along with shutting our southern border down and taking care of that situation. And I just think we should do everything we can to not necessarily appease Putin, but not to antagonize him.
And Bill, the idea of you didn't need to do this, they're hitting you with longer range rockets, fine. But we don't need to up the level of armament that's involved here. What do you mean? What do you make of that?
We do need to push the Russians back away from the border. We need to stop the bombardment that is killing children, women, soldiers, but civilians, and is attacking infrastructure, energy infrastructure. They're about to go into winter, Chris, Congressman. And the Russians are cynically targeting energy so that the Ukrainians are freezing So, yes, we do need to push them back. And, yes, these new weapons do have a link. The other thing, by the way, Chris and Congressman, that we keep in mind is it's not just our weapons. We're also talking about British and French weapons that do the same kind of things, which would add to the numbers, which is one of the arguments that they don't have enough. Well, they will have 3 nations worth and maybe 4, because the Germans have even a longer range version of this. And the Germans, no sign yet that they're going to do it, but there's under pressure for them to also go in to provide the weapons to allow the Ukrainians to push the Russians back.
The question is, what is that met with? You already got these North Koreans, 10,000 strong, sitting in there. What if it's the Chinese? What if it's somebody else? So there are points on both sides of this that demand leadership, and we will see what our newly elected president wants to do about it, and then we will assess. Tim Burchett, I miss you. Good to see you. Happy Thanksgiving if I don't talk to you again, but I'll try to make a call to you and the family before that. Ambassador Bill Taylor, happy Thanksgiving. Best to your family. Thank you for being here. To be continued. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. You got to resist the temptation to be all in your analysis when you don't know where you're going yet. Let's see what Trump has that could stop this, that will keep Putin from doing this again, and then we judge it. What do you think? 844-968-7720. On this show, we talk to each other. Next. All right, Dusty, who do you have?
Okay, we're going to start with Jason from Florida, and then we're going to move around the country.
Great. What's your question?
Hey, Chris, I'm a 26-year-old entrepreneur. I've long admired Elon Musk as potentially the best entrepreneur of our generation. I'm curious, with his involvement in politics, do you think that should change my opinion or his legacy at all?
Why would it? You still there?
Yeah. I mean, just his involvement with Trump, sometimes disagreeing with certain things that he does. Do you think that should change how I feel at all?
Trump... Do I think it should change how you feel? Don't ever let anybody tell you how to feel, okay? Let people inform your process, but you own your own head and your own heart, all right? You make your own judgments and be open to changing them as your feelings and facts change, okay? You don't like Trump. Musk is working for him. It is about whether or not they do anything to make your life better, okay? Trump is not your new dad, okay? He's not dating your mom. He's not coaching your team. Let's see what he can do within this system with these people to get something done. Elon Musk is hard to say, oh, he's a joke. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Next.
Okay, more on Musk. We have Richard from Corpus Christi, Texas.
What's your question?
My question to you, Chris, is to me, it seems like Elon Musk has a lot of influence on Donald Trump. And isn't that something like being an oligarch?
Only if things get done for him that are inappropriate because of his wealth and access. And I would be careful, and we've spoken before, I believe, and you're a very conscientious guy. You think deeply and you feel deeply and you're concerned. And I get it. I don't want to minimize that. But I will say the idea that Trump is impressed with, you got to qualify. Because he is impressed with no one as much as he is impressed with himself. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I'm saying he will have his own head. He listens. He often follows the direction that he gets last. But the idea of him being someone's puppet, I don't know. Next.
The callers are coming from all these new places, which is interesting. We're going to go to Sharon.
You mean like places that didn't exist before?
Places I never knew about, like Omaha, Nebraska. No, I'm only kidding. Sharon from Omaha, Nebraska.
The Oracle of Omaha. It's where Buffett's from. It's where my buddy Fran lives. What's your question?
Hey, Chris, this is Sharon. Quick question, not quick question, but a question for you, I guess, about the Bible issue in the public schools. Mm-hmm. I agree that the government shouldn't push that on other people. But then what do you think about those books on being transgender? Do you think those are appropriate in the grade schools?
I think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between the universe of opinion and the spectrum of ideas and inculcating religion. All right? We have in our First Amendment, not that its priority order. But the Establishment Clause was created for a reason. We don't have its equivalent about ideas that you don't agree with. Okay? I believe in the marketplace of ideas. Do I believe that there should be indoctrination? You must be this way. You must think this is okay? No. And I get parents' concerns about that. It's about balance. I see it as a different issue, but related. And I understand why you connect them. And I think there's space for both. Don't push religion as a state item, and be very careful about what you're introducing to young minds and how. I think you can do both. Next.
Okay, we're going to go over to OKC now. Jack.
It's a great city, by the way. Jack, what's your question?
How can we get more news agencies and stuff to have fair coverage like NewsNation? Because it's basically become a national security freaking risk that we just get one side everywhere, and we don't, get the information to become an informed electorate like that first guy was talking about.
Quick answers. 1, you got NewsNation. What else do you need? 2, more's not always better, and you have a full complement between digital, broadcast, and cable and radio of all kinds of perspectives. I don't think it's hard for you to get information. I don't think it's hard for you to get facts. I think it's more about rationales, analysis, perspective. I think that's where people are getting misled. Sure, you have mis and disinformation, but I don't think the problem is how many outlets we have. I think it's about what is expected from the public and what is rewarded by the public. Right? NewsNation is growing, but not nearly the way it should be. If you want people to give you all sides of something, reward the people who do it. That's your answer. Here we are. Next.
Next is we should go to break. We got a final thought coming up.
You kind of misled me there, didn't you?
I tried.
You said next we're going to, and then that's right, I'm over it.
It's a tease.
4 minutes and 45 seconds. Up next, final thought. I have been dealing with a fair amount of criticism, full stop. But one of them in particular is that I have an unrealistic view of what may happen next, that I'm being too sanguine, that I'm too optimistic about it, and as if I'm some kind of rube. Let's forget about the fact I've been doing this 25 years, and I grew up in politics, and this is all I deal with 24/7. I'm making a choice. I see this job in part as an act of faith of better in the future. It's the reason we do what we're